Dr. Theresa Bullard. Hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. And I got the idea to come on my show from a video that I saw where you talked about alchemy and subtracting the number 13 from your expression number, I believe it was. We'll get into that in due time, but for now, I want you to set the stage, tell your life story and everything that you can from a primary source perspective to explain who you are, what you experienced, the mystery school work that you do, and then after that, I hear music in the background,
Oops, sorry. That's my alarm.
Okay. So go ahead, you got the floor.
Okay, well, thank you for having me on your show. And yeah, well, telling my whole life story is quite a bit, but you tell me if I start going a little too much into detail and you want to shorten it up. But
I don't interrupt people. I don't have Alex Jones-itis, so
okay.
You're welcome to.
Well, my main background is first in physics. I have a Ph.D. in physics, and when I was really immersed in my PhD studies, I went from previously having a life of balance and diversity from growing up. I played sports. I had a lot of opportunity to explore. I just had a lot of diversity and just a well-rounded upbringing. But then when I went into graduate school, all of a sudden I was taken from this diverse and balanced way of life into 80 hours of physics per week. So it was all left brain approach. And I had to sacrifice a lot of other things. I pretty much had to sacrifice anything that wasn't absolutely necessary for surviving graduate school. And so that ended up throwing me into a pivotal time in my life where I had realized after about a year of that, something's got to give here. Like, I can't just keep going on with this like it has been. And I was finding myself really depressed and dissatisfied, and I had a lot of angst and disillusionment with how graduate school was going after that first year. And here I'd been sacrificing so much, and I wasn't really sure why. Like, I at that point in my life, this was probably back in 1999. And I was not sure really what I wanted to do with the PhD. I had just been sort of following the academic track. You get your undergraduate degree, and then if you want to go further and really be able to have a solid career, you go and you get an advanced degree, a master's or a PhD. So I figured at that time in my life, I figured I'm going as far as I need to go with my education in order to never really hit that glass ceiling as a woman, especially. And I picked physics because I had a real interest in understanding how the universe worked, and wanted to also be able to explore things from first principles and always stay on that cutting edge and have a strong enough foundation of knowledge and understanding that I could always stay with whatever the cutting edge was. So I went into physics, and I was doing my research in neutrino physics and particle physics, a little bit of astrophysics, and but then after that first year of graduate school, it was 80 hours of classwork and testing and research and homework, and there's no time for anything else. And I knew that I did not want to become a professor in academia. That was the one thing I knew. But it turns out when you go to physics graduate school, that's the main thing they train you for, is to become a professor at a university. So I had already felt a little bit like, okay, why am I really doing this after that first year? And especially if it was costing me that sense of meaning and happiness in my life. So before I decided to throw in the towel on it, I thought, okay, well, let's see if I can bring other aspects of life that I had prior to graduate school back in, and see if that helps bring a sense of balance and well-being again. So I brought back in athletics, and I brought back in creative hobbies and more social time, and I had a good relationship at the time, and I just started bringing all these other aspects of life back in very systematically, trying to figure out, okay, what's the key? Like, if I was to be most efficient and just focus on one or two things. What's the key? Like, where's that magic formula? And after about another year, I had brought all the different aspects I'd had in my life prior that I thought would be the keys. And I was feeling better. About a year later, I was feeling better, but I was like, okay, there's more balance, but there's still something really important missing. And whatever it is, it feels really essential to my sense of purpose and joy and happiness in life. And so then one day I was at the gym, and I was doing some sit-ups and working on my core and just sort of thinking about this at the back of my mind. And all of a sudden there was this little thought or little voice that came in and said, well, there's still one thing you haven't brought back into your life. And I thought, well, what is that? What's left still? And then that voice came in again, and it just said spirituality. And it was true. It was something that I had sort of had in my life prior. I'd never really felt like I had to pursue it directly. It was always just sort of there, informing my background way of looking at life, my personal philosophy. And yet it was the one thing I really had not actively brought back into my life. And so I thought, okay, well, I'd be surprised. At this point, I was very well indoctrinated into the scientific way of thinking. And while I believed in a spiritual side of life, I never really thought that was primary or that I had to really actively pursue it. But here it was, the only thing I hadn't really brought back in. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna give this a try. But anything I'm going to pursue spiritually has to, at this stage in my life, has to agree with what I know to be true scientifically, or at least not negate or conflict with what I know to be true scientifically. So I dove into all of the, anything I could find on the intersections of science and spirituality, science and consciousness, Tao of physics kind of stuff. And I really found that I started getting very excited when I came to reading some books that were overlapping quantum physics with some Eastern philosophies, for like Buddhism and Taoism, for example. And it got me really excited, like, oh, I remembered that this is why I even chose to go into physics in the first place, that I had this, in a way, a spiritual inspiration to understand the greater universe beyond just our sort of mundane human lives. I wanted to understand the greater universe and what's out there and how does it work and where do we fit into all that picture. And so inspiration was getting reignited as I started to dive into this science and spirituality and science and consciousness field. And then from there, two things happened. One, I started to, with all the pursuing and the research that I was doing and the reading in these topics that I was doing, I found myself getting a little frustrated that it was all very conceptual and, theoretical. It wasn't really practical. There wasn't really anything that we could do with it or apply, test it out. And I'm a scientist, so I knew that if we wanted to really bring this into a realm of practicality and really give it some validity, we had to bring it into a more applied format. And so I started searching for how can we bring this down to earth? How can we take these really interesting concepts where quantum physics and, spiritual wisdom, ancient spiritual wisdom overlap, and really bring it into a way that we can apply in our lives, that is practical, that could even be tested perhaps. And that question sent me on a path that ultimately synchronicity kept pointing me to look into alchemy. And I won't get into the whole story about, how I got into alchemy, but at first when it came up, I just was like, no, I'm a real scientist. I'm not here. I don't have anything to do with alchemy. Alchemy is not real science. And, I just kind of poo-pooed it and waved my hands away at it. And, but it kept coming up and it kept coming up and it kept coming up. And so finally I thought, all right, well, the universe seems to be pointing me to look at alchemy, so I'm going to take a look here. And as I started to read into alchemy, I realized very quickly that it was not at all what we were taught. In science, history, and education, the story was, that the alchemists were just trying to turn lead into gold, and they were, kind of charlatans and pseudoscientists, just sort of tinkering around in the dark basements of medieval times. And so that was the stereotypical image that was in my mind. But as I dove into actually reading about alchemy, I realized it was a gold mine of wisdom, and that true alchemy is about transformation and the formulas of transformation that apply to us at a personal level, as well as apply to evolution in nature, and how we can participate with that. So and not only that, but our modern day science, pharmacology, medicine, psychology, like so many of our modern sciences came out of alchemy. And yet when it was alchemy, the science and the spiritual sides were integrated. And so I realized, well, if we want to reintegrate science and spirituality, why not go back to the source of where both, where the science came from? And I realized as I studied a little bit more of the history that it was more political reasons for why the alchemy separated, or why the science separated out from alchemy and the spiritual side of things. It wasn't because the two weren't compatible. It was just there were other political and financial reasons behind it. And so I started diving into exploring alchemy more. And then the other big thing that happened for me, which led me ultimately to the Modern Mystery School, was that I found myself desiring a connection with other people that kind of thought along the same lines, that I wanted to talk with other people about the things I was discovering, and I was getting really excited about them and finding this passion rising up in me to explore, but also to share. And I wanted community of people that I felt like I could really connect with in this way. In the physics, traditional, academic physics departments, you don't really mention spirituality if you want to keep your credibility. So I had to be very quiet when I was in graduate school about all of that, because it just wasn't acceptable. And I had watched other graduate students and some teachers, get kind of ostracized because of their spiritual beliefs. And so I just kept very quiet about it. And I started searching elsewhere for spiritual community. And, I went to different spiritual events and stuff, and expos and conferences, trying to find that community. But I kept finding that a lot of the New Age stuff was lacking the depth that I needed as a scientist. And while there was very nice people, and it was, I liked some of what I was hearing there, it was like, okay, well, I needed it to be more grounded. And then at some point I had gotten frustrated enough and was feeling isolated enough that I just decided, okay, universe, I have a request here, and I need you to help me find my tribe, my spiritual family and path and community. And so I just really put it out there to the universe to help me find that. And about 2 weeks later, again, synchronicity came and led me to somebody who was a practitioner for the Modern Mystery School. Her name was Verla Wade, and I went and had a session from her called a life activation. And at the time I lived in Seattle, and she happened to be local to the Seattle area. And as I was there having this life activation session, which was said to be, awakening DNA potential and helping turn on more of our innate gifts and so forth. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm interested. I'm curious to see how or if this works. And as we were there, I was getting this session, I was asking all kinds of questions, like, where does this come from? And what's the difference between this modality and that modality? And what's this mystery school thing? And is this for real? And, I'd ask all kinds of questions. And she didn't really have all the answers in that moment, but she gave me a couple brochures and put me on her newsletter list. And I would say that the session itself, like, I could feel the energy But what happened afterwards was more significant to me. It started this sequence of events that I started having a lot of little adjustments that would happen in my life. More self-awareness came in, more recognition of patterns that I had in my life and what was serving my higher potential and what wasn't serving my higher potential. And as I would identify things that weren't serving me, I'd ask, well, what could I do instead? And immediately answers would come through. I'd make those little adjustments. I found that it was good, and I started to keep doing it and pursue, more. And after just a few months, I looked back and I realized that I had had so many changes happen in my life since that life activation, all of which added up to be really good and really positive difference in my life, where I did feel like I was really starting to get on track with who and what I am. And I was able to, for the first time, really identify that I felt my purpose in life was actually to really bridge the science and spirituality and help pioneer that. And that meant to follow a non-traditional track. And so then I decided to pursue further with next steps of empowerment and initiation and so forth with the Modern Mystery School. And from that point, after receiving the initiation, which is a 2-day training and a broad sweep of the teachings of the Mystery School, I knew from that first weekend when I went for that next level of training that this was the universe's answer to my request to help me find my path and spiritual community, family that really were able to operate at the level of deeper knowledge and understanding that I was seeking. And it really accelerated my progression in life. Like after I received that initiation, a lot started to accelerate in my life. And I found that it was one place where things that I had been exploring and interested in prior, and I'd done different studies and different traditions and so forth. I found that in the Mystery School, it was all there in one place, and it all came together to really show how it was one universal system. And especially when I came to the Universal Kabbalistic teachings within the Mystery School and that method, there was massive amount of growth and deeper levels of understanding that started to come in from that. And I just loved it so much and I saw the benefits in my own life and the lives of others from using the tools and the methods that I just decided to keep pursuing it. And eventually I became a teacher for the Mystery School. And then now today I'm bringing the science back in and merging it with these teachings. So it's kind of like I went and got a Ph.D. in metaphysics in addition to getting my Ph.D. in physics. And then now it's been a process of weaving the two together more and sharing what I've learned over the years with people through my mystery teaching series on Gaia TV, which is what you watched. And then just, all the lectures and classes that I teach internationally around the world. So that's a synopsis.
Yes, it was a Gaia TV video. I do not subscribe to Gaia TV. I prefer to just have the universe decide when it can go for free on YouTube for everybody to see, and that's when I watch it. I'm an 8 life path, so kind of finicky with money in that regard. But that being said, I think we might as well just get right to that thing that I found really, really interesting that you said in the video regarding alchemy and the number 13 and how it ties in with alchemy in many ways. It's interesting how 13, when I do my astrology, is my number for combating misfortune, which is the opposite of what triskaidekaphobians would assert. So I'm very interested to hear this. And also, when it comes to the subtracting 13 from your, I believe you said your expression number, to get some magic number. In my case, that would be 12 because my expression number is 1. I wanted to ask you specifically, in my case, do I add the 2 and the 1 and 12 to make 3, or do I just keep the 12? And maybe you can help me understand the significance of that. And then, well, of course, explain what I'm talking about here. You can get into, because you know exactly what I'm talking about regarding these numbers and life path and expression and doing the math and alchemy and all. So I've held long enough. Why don't you help make sense of this and get to my situation, and so everyone else who wants to do this can understand it.
Okay, so the particular episode of Mystery Teachings that you're referring to is one working with what we call Vitruvian numerology. So it goes back to Vitruvius, who was an ancient Roman architect, and he worked with the Pythagorean, no, sorry, not Pythagorean. He worked with the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean a lot. And so this whole episode talked about, what is the golden mean? So I think they titled it "Living Through the Golden Mean," is, if I recall. And it talks about the golden mean, which is this. Some people also call it the phi ratio, which is 1.618 ... It's a ratio that you see all over nature. So in the way that, like if you look at a pine cone or a shell, the spiral shells, or even the arrangement of the stars in the Milky Way galaxy, or, on a sunflower. So all of these follow what's called the golden spiral. And that golden spiral is dictated by this proportion of the 1.618. And in addition, harmony, in music, so like the perfect fifth on an octave is going to be a ratio that approximates the phi ratio, or the golden mean. And so the idea is that the phi ratio creates harmony. It also creates expansion. So if you look at a golden spiral, it accelerates in its expansion outwards versus maybe a circular spiral, which is more tighter. The golden spiral goes out and out and out and accelerates really rapidly to a larger scale. So it's also a number that dictates growth and growth patterns in nature. So like the trees and how the leaves on the trees emerge and so forth. All of these follow this sort of golden ratio, or this Fibonacci sequence. And Fibonacci sequence is the number one. Actually, zero. You start with 0, and then the number 1, and then you add the 2 previous digits to get to the next number. So 0 plus 1 is 1, and then you have 1 and 1 is 2, and then 1 and 2 is 3, and then 2 and 3 is 5, and 3 and 5 is 8, and 5 and 8 is 13, and you can just keep on going onwards up the scale. And as you go further and further up this Fibonacci sequence, when you take the ratio, or you divide one number by a sequential number in that sequence, it gives you the golden ratio, the 1.618. So that's how the two tie together. So in the Vitruvian numerology, rather than working with a system of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we work with a system of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21 onwards and onwards. And so it's a sequence of quantum leaps in between your steps in the number sequence. So what is being proposed in this Vitruvian numerology is that this sequence and this way of working with numbers really enhances life. It supports our quantum leaps. It supports our acceleration, and helps us to advance and break out of the box. Whereas when you work with a traditional, what we call the Pythagorean number system, which is 1 through 9, it's more like you're in the box. It's a grid system. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And 9 is sort of like a death march. It's an ending. And in numerology, 9 typically represents the completion or the ending or the death, whereas 1 typically represents the beginning. And so it's just a different rhythm. It's not that one's right or wrong. It's more like the numbers 1 through 9 were not meant to be a counting system. They were meant to be like rays of creation, and they fall on you can see them on the tree of life. and their essences, their vibrational essences, but they weren't meant to be a counting system. And so when we started to use that as a counting system and to also use Cartesian coordinates as a grid system, it really put our mind, the way our mind works, into a box. It made it be a very linear, structured, very rule-based way of thinking. Whereas if you shift to a counting system that's based on the Fibonacci sequence, it very quickly breaks you out of the box. And it's an accelerated kind of approach. It's a life-enhancing kind of approach versus a death march. And so we're proposing Vitruvian numerology as just one possibility for how to break out of the box, how to really start to redefine the way our mind works. And you know, often, let's just take this at a very practical level. People often think, okay, for me to get from point A to point B, I have to take, let's say, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and so on to get there. And so they think, you know, one step at a time. And it's a slow process to get there usually. But if you think in terms of Vitruvian numerology, your steps now are not steps, they're leaps. And so you can get there a lot faster. And, you know, it provides a lot of room for synchronicity to come in and for the universal flow to come in and help manifest it for you and support you. And you know, you can really expand in your way of operating. And so Vitruvian numerology is about that. It's like, okay, how many steps do you need? What is your frequency? And then how many steps do you need to get to your next leap? So when you say, okay, 13, when I take the number 13 and then we subtract your personal number from it, then why? You know, why do we pick that? Well, it just turns out that the brainwave frequencies. So there's certain ranges of brainwave frequencies that relate to the Fibonacci sequence as well. So, for example, when we're in a delta brainwave state, it's like a deep, deep, deep sleep, unconscious. It's from 0 to 3 hertz. So 0 and 3 are, you know, so 0, 1, 1, 2, and 3 are all on the Fibonacci sequence. So that 0 to 3 hertz range is what we would call delta. And in that range of the Fibonacci sequence is kind of deep sleep, unconscious, maybe out of body experience type stuff, or astral, you know, plane type stuff. And then from 3 to about 5 hertz, you have a theta range. And theta is a dreamlike state. It's a deep meditative state. It's a healing state. And it's a state where you're really connected into a universal mind. So you might not be so focused on oneself, but there's a sense of this connection to universal consciousness, and or it could be still dreamlike. So it's not fully awakened. It's sort of a dreamlike state. And then when you move, and 5 is also in the Fibonacci sequence. And then from 5 to about 8 hertz is a brainwave range that we call alpha. And alpha is, like a light meditative state. You can be awake, but you're still kind of daydreaming, or you're just kind of transitioning out from sleep into awaking consciousness. So you're not fully awake, but you're not fully asleep. You're kind of in this in-between zone. And that, you know, so 5 to 8 hertz. And again, so with the Fibonacci sequence, we have 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and then 13. So the 8 hertz is a transition, just like alpha is a transition from between sleeping and waking. And so then when we get from 8 up to 13 hertz, I'm pulling all these numbers off the top of my head. And what I can say is that from 13 up, let's see, it's into the beta range. And yeah, beta range goes from about 13 up to, I believe, 35 hertz. And so when you get to 13 hertz, now you're in the waking consciousness state. And so beta is like, okay, you're awake. You are able to perceive and work with the outer world. It's a number of awakening. So in that episode, we're using 13 as representative of a number of awakening on the Fibonacci sequence, because with our personal life experience, when we hit that 13 beats per second within our brainwaves, we tend to be awake. And so symbolically, we're using 13 as the number of awakening. So then you have a personal number, and your personal Vitruvian number is based on the number of your first name. So your first name is like your power, and then you would use the numerology chart, which goes back to the time of Pythagoras, which is based on a 1 through 9 with our alphabet. And anyone can just look up, Pythagorean numerology or just numerology chart, and you'll see the English letters and how they line up with the numbers of 1 through 9. And so let's take your first name, and you get a number for each letter. So that's like each letter has a frequency that underlies it. And so you find out what that frequency is, and then you add up those numbers just for your first name, and you continue to add those numbers up. So let's say you get 49 as your number of your name, and then we would take the 4 and the 9 and we would add those together. So 4 plus 9 gives us 13, and then we would take the 1 and the 3 from the 13 and add those together. So 1 plus 3 is 4. So then the number of our name would become a 4. And so that tells us one thing. That's just our base frequency. And then to get our Vitruvian number, we want to take 13 minus the number of our name. So in this example, 13 minus 4 would be 9. So then my Vitruvian number would be 9. For you, you said that your name is a 1. It was just your first name? Comes out to 1?
Yeah, well, whatever you said in the video, I thought it was the expression number, which I know is 1, and that, but it's not the expression number that I'm thinking of in numerology.
It's not, yeah, it's not normal numerology where you do like your, in traditional numerology, they'll have you take your full birth name, and you have like what is the final number of your full name, what is the final number of just the vowels in your name, what is the final number of your consonants in your name, and those are different, self-image, self-expression,
well, regardless of whatever you said in the video, I think that when I saw the video, it must have been 1. So in my case, it would be 13 minus 1, and what confused me is am I supposed to add the 2 and the 1 and 12 to make 3, or just keep it at 12?
You would, in this case, you would keep it at 12, because what it is so your frequency is, this is your base frequency. And what you want to know is how many steps do you need to take to get to 13, which is an awakening number, right? So you would then, from 1, you would have to take 12 steps to get to 13, which is the number of awakenings. So then the way that, you don't need to interpret it as having any particular meaning other than, I need to figure out how to bring this number 12 into my life. So examples of that is, if I'm going to plan something, I want to accomplish a goal, always think of what are the 12 steps I need to take to get to that goal, right? So whatever your Vitruvian number is, mine is 6. So I always think, okay, what are the 6 things that I need to do to get to that goal? And then I would chart that out. You could also start bringing that rhythm into your life, right? So how can I take, in the morning when I wake up, I mean, this really depends on the individual if they want to go to this extent, but, the more you can bring the frequency of your Vitruvian number into your life, then the more you are basically up-leveling yourself to that number of awakening every day. So like the first thing, when you get out of bed, what are 6 things or 12 things that I can do? Whatever my Vitruvian number is, how many, what can I do that works with that number and to bring that frequency into my life so that it can help me up level. So maybe I want to count out 12 steps between my bed and my bathroom, or I want to do 12 deep breaths first thing in the morning, or, you know, I'm going to go shopping and I'm going to go, you know, get some, I don't know, some decorations or something, right?
So
So
I
I'm going to
said I
get
don't
12.
interrupt, but a perfect thing happened in my life. I stopped reading books for a little while in my life. I was just the TV guy, but then I decided I'm going to start reading again. And of all the books that I could have chosen to get me to become a bookworm again back in 2010, the book I chose was The 12th Planet by Zachariah Sitchin. So
Okay.
yeah, so I guess it does go to show you that these things happen in
Yeah.
life, and
Yeah.
numerology is for real. And I'm not going to bore everybody to death by telling my numerology and all. That's not important. But we do want to get into the science behind how these things work. And well, I think I may list here. When it comes to the situation we're in right now, I think because a lot of people are stressing out and all, and I think we might as well make a current events thing out of this. There's so much debate as to what the best way to handle this is. I mean, you got
Yeah.
so many people in the light worker community bashing the people in the fear porn community. Like I saw a video, this lady attacking David Icke because David Icke's not talking about mass arrests and global currency reset and all that, and he should be talking about that to make
Oh,
humanity feel
jeez.
happy.
Oh
And
my
David
goodness.
Icke is actually not trying to push that, even though it may be real, because he doesn't want humanity to become couch
Fear-based.
potatoes, and he wants people to
Mm.
like think, okay, this there is the possibility that this could be an Illuminati scam, just like so many else things have. There's factions that have infiltrated factions within this whole thing. Hopefully, and I'm sure in the end, it'll definitely work out to the positive. But everybody has their own way of going about doing this, and I've always supported David Icke. Exposing every weak link and using the infinite consciousness safety net as a way, as a solution to everything, and all the light workers and all that sometimes they're too much in la la land. So hey, I've babbled long enough. Let's do your take on this issue.
Okay. Wow. Um, I'd say that there are a lot of theories going on out there right now, and whether they're media theories or conspiracy theories or spiritual lightworker ascension theories, or, you know, there's a lot of theories going on. And honestly, I don't think anyone really knows because there's a lot of confusion. So for me, as somebody who I've always tried to look at the bigger themes and the archetypal picture that's happening versus getting caught up in the minutia, because life is always going to follow certain patterns. You know, there's always, you know, Carl Jung's work, for example, he talks about archetypes, and Joseph Campbell talks about archetypes, and every story, every great tale that's ever been told is there's this certain archetypal themes that show up. And so I tend to focus on that level because it's sort of like, rather than trying to figure out the lay of the land from being on the battlefield, I want to go up to a higher elevation and be able to look at it from a higher perspective and take in more of the field from that higher elevation. So I tend to look at, okay, how can I get a higher spiritual and global picture of what's going on here? And that means tuning into the archetypes. And for me, as an alchemist, I always am looking at it from that sequence of the alchemical process, because alchemy is a phenomenon in nature. Nature is always flowing in some alchemical way, and there's stages to that alchemical process. Now, it's very possible that we could be in the alchemical process but then get stuck in one of those stages. So another one of the things that I talk about in some of my mystery teaching series, I also have a book on it called The Game Changers, Social Alchemists in the 21st Century. And it's all about how the alchemy is taking place behind the scenes, trying to move humanity towards an evolutionary step. And regardless of the the specific details of how it plays out, in retrospect, we can look back and we can say, okay, that event, like 9/11 or the the NAFTA trade agreements, or like these events have, they seem very political or sort of global or whatnot, and yet they are leading towards certain awakenings within the collective consciousness. Because 9/11, for example, it was tragic, but it was one of the first times where you had the whole world tuning in to one event all around the world, not just locally, but all around the world. People were tuning into that event, and what resulted from it is that there was so many people opening up their hearts in compassion for those who were actually in the situation. And so there was, and this was even shown by the Princeton Engineering Research Lab, PEAR, PEAR, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. And they had random number generators that had been going and just sort of, they'd been using them for different experiments to test if consciousness can affect the random number generator and shift it away from randomness. And so there have been some global events where all of a sudden, their random number generators should just be going at a random kind of sequence, but then all of a sudden they saw a change, a diversion away from a randomness, and that tended to coincide with a big global event where everyone's attention was going towards this, something that was happening. It happened a couple times, and 9/11 was one of those events. And so it showed that all of a sudden there was a coherence in the human collective consciousness. And that caused these random number generator events to go away from randomness and in towards a greater level of order. Even though technologically and scientifically that shouldn't be possible, the human collective consciousness made an impact on it and shifted it out of its normal way of operating. And so that really showed that even though it was a terrible and tragic event, it shifted something within the human collective consciousness. And the result of that from a collective level, even if the details of how it happened and why it happened and who caused it and all of that, that those are still questionable, right? But the result of it was a negative event, but the result of it actually ended up being a positive in the human collective consciousness because it woke people up and opened their hearts at a global level. So I think that with the current situation, with the COVID-19 stuff, that again, I'm not really one to dive too much into the conspiracies of it, but I look at what is this event, what impact is it having on the collective, and how can it serve? Like, how can we use it, even if it's a negative situation, even if there's manipulation behind the scenes, which there always is. How can we as individuals use this, and how can we as a collective use this to turn it towards a positive? And when you look at the alchemy of where we're at, there's 7 stages to alchemy. There's what we call calcination, which is like the burning, where your life is just sort of upended, and at some level that this is a calcination experience. And calcination always initiates the alchemical process. It starts it. And then after calcination, so after you've had this very upsetting event, where your world gets rocked, and you feel pretty burned by it, the next stage that tends to come in alchemy, we call it dissolution. And dissolution is a very emotional, kind of confusing time. You can have sadness come up, you can have anger come up, you could have, confusion and lack of clarity come up, fear. There's all kinds of swirl of emotions from the subconscious coming up to the surface, and it makes it very difficult for people to be discerning and to make the right choices during that time. But in a way, it's sort of getting us back in touch with our soul. Because we've been so focused on the outer world that we haven't really been paying attention to what's going on in our own soul or our deeper psyche. And so at some point, those after that swirl of emotions, things finally start to clarify, and we're able to start getting, kind of picking the pieces apart. Things start to maybe settle in a bit, like we just allow for some settling down, and this moves into a stage of alchemy called separation. And separation is like where the essentials are being separated out. What's really going on here? What's most important? What do we need to keep? What do we need to discard? What parts of our way of life, which is being really challenged right now, what hasn't been working and what has been working? What parts of that old way of life do we want to keep, but what parts do we need to really question and let go of here? And, as I look at the current situation just at a very, you just look at one of the major themes that's coming up right now with COVID-19. The theme is wash your hands, which is like, it's about hygiene, it's about cleanliness, it's about purification. And, it's about asking people to take more personal responsibility to reteach themselves a new way of life that supports greater cleanliness, and also recognition of how my choices and my behaviors and my actions impact other people. We're all in this together. So those are actually very positive themes that are emerging out of this really negative situation. Purification and recognizing that we're all in this together. We're all one humanity. We're all connected. And so then so separation is really about getting clear about that. Like what is important here, and what is it that hasn't been working that we need to let go of, or we need to retrain ourselves, or we need to eliminate and let that old way die. And then as you move forward into the next stage of alchemy, it's called conjunction. And conjunction's where, okay, now we know what we want to keep, we know what's working, let's now start bringing the various pieces back together again and create a new way, a new vision for who we are as we emerge from this whole experience. And then that's like the halfway point. When we get to this, okay, so for example, just from this one event, we are still in what I would say is the disillusion phase of the COVID-19 situation, where the emotions are still swirling. There's a lot of confusion. There's, just sort of this big mix of stuff happening. But we're trying to start separating out, okay, what's working, what's not working. The scientists are digging into, trying to get the data so that we can get some clarity. So we're starting to try and do the separation stage. We're definitely not at the conjunction stage yet, but maybe when we start being able to get back to some way of moving life forward again, allowing people to go back to work, to start interacting again and so forth. But it's going to be a new way of life, right? It's going to be different from how life was before. But hopefully we will be pulling together the pieces that really work and that can be sustainable in a long run, and that help us kind of lift up to a higher way of life versus just the egocentric way of life that we've been running on. And then as we get to that new stage, though, conjunction is not a permanent stage. It's a fledgling stage. And it has to go through a maturing process to get to the point where it's really fully integrated and solidified. And so the next stage after after conjunction is what we call fermentation. And fermentation is like, it's a maturing process, but it's also, it can feel like a dark night of the soul. It's like a death of the old personality. It's like, we might be tempted to go back to old ways of life, and then we will realize, like, no, I can't go back to that old way of life. I have to allow that old way of life to die. But we may have attachments to it. We may not want to let go of it. And yet then there will be, if we don't let go of it, there will be the repercussions. Maybe it'll come back around again, and we have to go back into the isolation again. And, which the media is already starting to sort of forewarn us about. Like, if, maybe we get to the other side of this, but then there's a resurgence. Like, what happens if there's a resurgence? Well, then we're going to have to go through periodic, times of isolation again. And that to me is like a fermentation stage, where until we really can get to letting the old ways die that really aren't serving, and emerge into a whole new way of life where we really are looking at the higher good, and we're really drawing out our essential human nature that is recognizing our responsibility and our empowerment and our connectedness and so forth, that more the essence of who we are and the essence of what's really important. And it is a death of the ego and the personality stuff that kind of gets in our way. And then only when we really allow those old ways to die through that fermentation process do we then break through into the final two stages. But what's interesting about fermentation is that usually to get through it, it requires isolation. It requires going off like on a vision quest, a lot of meditation. It requires a lot of introspection. It requires sort of battling with our own negative ego and letting go of those attachments. And it requires a lot of quiet time and just sort of going inward. And at a bigger scale, I feel like we've been in fermentation. Humanity's been in fermentation now for many years, but we keep getting stuck here. So that's why we aren't moving forward. So in a way, it's like we're having to go through more extreme scenarios that are trying to drive us forward because we are needing to make a leap in collective consciousness. And honestly, if we don't, and this isn't just talking from a spiritual place, like science has been saying for a while now, we are at so many tipping points on this earth. You have financial tipping points, you have ecological tipping points, you have, water purity tipping point. We have so many different, you have the coral reefs dying. We have so many different tipping points happening all over the world right now that it's leading to crisis on this planet, and that humans are really at root cause of needing to change our ways. And we do have the solutions, we do have the resources and the technologies and so forth to change the impact that we're having in this world, but we're not implementing them. So greed has been holding it back, and just egoic kind of ways of being, separation mentality has been holding it back. And so we need to make a change, and we need to let go of the old ways, the old egoic way of being of humanity, to really make this shift. Because if we don't, we wind up, creating a dystopia, or we wind up destroying each other, or, our environment gets destroyed. But if we do,
that's definitely not the. Sorry to interrupt you, but you mentioned something earlier about 9/11, and this kind of leads into what I was going to talk about next. And well, you can finish up what you were going to say, but after that, I do want to bring this up because I just got around to watching that video that was uploaded on Corey Good's Sphere Bearing Alliance YouTube channel, which was uploaded on the 26th of March. Remember that day fondly because my 89-year-old maternal grandmother passed away that day after being in her bedridden for 15 freaking days, longer than, as they say in the British Isles, a fucking fortnight without food and water. I don't know how she did that. It was like ETs were keeping her alive, and then she died on the 26th around 10 o'clock in circumstances that seem fitting that I'm not going to babble on because it's not beside the point.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Well, don't be sorry. She's in paradise, and it's funny. Her husband actually outlived her. My paternal grandpa is still alive, and well, he doesn't even know she's dead, but at a spiritual level, he does. But anyhow, getting back to 9/11, the thing about the Corey Good David Wilcock video that was uploaded that day. I heard, I'm about halfway through, and I heard David Wilcock actually talk about Sandy Hook and 9/11. Apparently, David Wilcock is not looking at the whole thing, and this is where we get into the idea of is it best to go for the whole truth, no matter how crazy the truth sounds, or do you think maybe it's best to just understand that there's going to be factions, and everybody's argument about the best way to expose this is, well, their opinion. Here's the issue. David Wilcock said that people did die at Sandy Hook, and that the planes that hit the World Trade Center were like real planes and all that. And well, anybody who listened to my interview with John Lear and Jim Fetzer knows that the plane scientifically method, they had to have been holograms that hit the World Trade Center using sophisticated technology that's kept out of the public arena. And I just had Jim Fetzer on my show a second time recently to give the corrupt courts a kick in the ass They were some Sandy Hook victim's family member allegedly was suing him for his book where he wrote "Nobody Died at Sandy Hook." It was a government drill to um, push gun control. And apparently David Wilcock is completely ignorant of that book, as he said that Sandy Hook had people die and 9/11 planes were real and the planes landed somewhere and all that. And this goes back to 2012 when I was at a conference that Richard Gage was holding on a 9/11 anniversary day. He himself later in a conference, after someone asked him, "You think you're preaching to the choir, Richard? All this laws of physics stuff, everybody's heard already." But then, funny after that, someone referenced the website Veterans Today about the holographic planes and all that, and nuclear bombs taking down the World Trade Center, and Richard Gage actually said it's a horrible sight, saying those planes were not real, and the Twin Towers were justified by a direct energy weapon. It wasn't nanothermite. And okay, the issue here is different people are going to see different things, and there's a lot of things that complicate it when you look at all the evidence. And when I heard David Wilcock say that he believes that people did die at Sandy Hook and the planes were holograms, I'm thinking, well, maybe this guy, if he does know the truth, he doesn't want to say it because maybe does have a little bit of a fear of what other people think that's keeping him from telling everything, or maybe he didn't look at the whole story. So I've babbled long enough. You see where I'm going with this. How do we make sense of trying to find the whole truth, but at the same time factions are going to say there's a better way of going about awakening people than trying to find the truth. Doing that is going to make people look silly.
Okay, well, once again, I tend to not dive into the conspiracy world just because it's quite a rabbit hole that my focus is more on how can I help people awaken and not get so caught up in the rabbit hole search, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So personally, I feel that when you talk about revealing the truth, I think that what's more important is what's going to serve people, right? And if a certain piece of information, if it really serves to empower people and support their progression, then that is important information to be delivered. But if it's information that is going to just put them in a tailspin, cause a lot of confusion, fear, distrust, and just shattering and putting them into complete despair and dismay, I don't think that serves, even if it is true. So, there's certain things that might be happening that may be true, but letting everybody know the fullness of that, that it's actually gonna, it could get in the way of their progression. It could cause them to just sit and give up. And I don't know what to believe anymore, so I'm not going to do anything.
If you've been listening to David Wilcock's videos, you'd think there's going to be 3 days of darkness, where in 3 8-hour spans over a 24-hour period, they're basically going to show us a massive documentary saying the conspiracy theorists and UFO nuts were right all along. Get used to it. If you can't handle the truth, well, here it is. You have no choice but to believe it now, because now we're admitting it. Well, is that going to be the timeline we're going to be on over the next couple weeks? I do not know, but yeah,
I don't know. I feel like if if the information that he's getting is true, then we'll know when it comes. I mean, if there's really going to be 3 days of darkness on the internet or whatever that is, then when that happens, then I might start to give some credibility to what's being said. But until then, I think I don't know, there's some fear tactics happening. There's shock value happening. I think it's really important right now. See, here's the thing, is that just with COVID-19 itself, there's a lot of people in fear and panic. And ascension, if we're talking about ascension and mass awakening of people, it's not going to happen through fear tactics. And it's not going to happen through just it being done to people either. Ascension and awakening is something that we each have to choose, and we each have to do the work on our own to be ready for it. And to put people in fear Like there's already so many people in fear, and the energy in the collective consciousness is in so much fear right now, and so much confusion and so much chaos, that we don't need, if we are somebody who wants to be part of the solution and you want to be making a positive contribution, then we don't need to be adding to the fear. What we need is we need to be creating greater levels of peace, greater levels of harmony, greater levels of connection to ourselves. Because when we can really connect in with the truth of who we are, that, you know, we are far greater beings than what you see in this flesh and bone body. We have an eternal consciousness. We have this eternal essence to us that exists infinitely, eternally, far beyond this physical life and this moment and this experience. And when we get so caught up in this experience and these dramas and this detail of, you know, who's doing what to who, and, you know, all of the stuff that creates so much distrust and separation and so forth, that's the illusion. That's the matrix. And whether it's an illusion within an illusion within an illusion, meaning it's, you know, a bunch of distorted false information that sounds really true or sounds really good, but all it's doing is misleading people further into this mindset of separation, or whether it's, you know, just our own ego stuff or whatever it is, if it's coming from a sense of separation, that's not going to lead to enlightenment or mass awakening. We need to recognize our connectedness. We need to recognize our higher being that is beyond this physical life and this condition. We need to connect into that. We need to be meditating and doing, you know, certain inner work that helps us connect into that. And so, you know, as far as what I see from the alchemical perspective and the bigger picture, you got to let go of all of the drama of the, you know, some of these you know, conspiracies of who's doing what to who. I mean, all that does is encourage greater victimhood. The victimhood is not going to liberate anybody. We need to get into our recognition of our own empowerment. And when we can do that, you know, realize all the answers are within you. They're not outside of you. If you want the truth, turn in to your own inner self, to your own inner essence, and connect into that, rather than giving your power away to all of these, you know, people who are outside of you and trying to tell you what to believe and what's going to happen and whatnot. There's just a lot of drama going on right now. And we don't need all of that extra stuff, because just COVID-19 by itself, and the way the media is spinning it up, it's putting a lot of fear into people. And to add to that fear and to add to that drama is not the way to help people awaken. It's just causing further shutdown.
No question about that. And okay, I'll let you finish your thought when I give you the chance to talk again. But leading into what I was going to talk about next, merging technology and spirituality. How fitting that I just bought the episode 9 of Star Wars, featuring the return of Emperor Palpatine in a clone form with the Sith Lord's spirit and soul in it. So fitting with like a hero like Henry Kissinger, who looks like a Sith Lord, was cloned, sent some ET contactee, and so we don't know if the Henry Kissinger we see now is the real one, or a clone that's an empty vessel with a soul, and like Palpatine was in the movie. But anyway, one of the key lines of the Star Wars movie, and George Lucas, he knows the name of the tune, Truth on the Guise of Fiction, his movies are, of course. One of the comical lines I seem to remember was, never underestimate the power of a droid, which, of course, never underestimate the power of the Force. Well, I'd like to point out David Icke did come out with a recent video where he said 2030 he expects technology and humanity to like have a singularity with each other of sorts. He did not specify whether it was going to be a good or bad timeline. I presume it's definitely going to be good, which is a good thing, because it's not like going to be Terminator timeline in the Terminator movies, when Terminator was sent back from 2029 AD to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, but that was a negative timeline where the machines took over in 2029, 2030. Hopefully the timeline that David Icke says we're going to see is going to be a positive timeline where machines and humanity work together. And I just got off the internet talking with an ET contactee whose name I'm not going to mention, who actually doesn't seem to feel very comfortable with the idea with merging humanity and our spiritual awakening with machines. Well, let's look at the Star Wars movie. If the droids can help us, then by all means, let's use the machines to work with us. And with that being said, how do you expect humanity and machines to work in harmony with each other? And what do we have to do to make sure that the weak links in that harmony don't manifest into something bad?
Yeah, so I think it's inevitable that we are going into a machine age. I mean, we're not going to stop the marching onwards of innovation and technology. And, there's a big push right now behind all the artificial intelligence world. And, science and technology are going to keep advancing forward. So I think at some level, we have to accept that this is part of our future. And then the bigger question, which is what you just said, is how do we ensure that it becomes a harmonious type of situation versus a dystopian, kind of takeover type of situation. And once again, I'm going to come back to the human collective consciousness that, again, we have the technologies, we have the resources, we have the tools, we have the strategies, we have everything we need right now. We have everything we need to transform our world within a year or two, and to really end starvation, to end poverty, to fix the environmental issues that are going on the planet, to create more sustainable cities and ways of life. I mean, we have everything we need now to do so. And the one thing that is stopping us from implementing all of that is, where is our collective consciousness at? Where are we choosing to put our attention? Where are we putting our value? Where are we putting our money? What are we doing with the tools and technologies that are available to us? And that has to do with human consciousness. So to me, the only way to get to a future where we can have a positive, harmonious interaction of human life and all sentient life on Earth, and technology, is if humans make a shift in collective consciousness to recognizing who we are as spiritual beings. And I don't think personally, as somebody who has studied deeply into metaphysics, I don't really believe that you can just take your consciousness and think that it's just quantum bits and then transfer that over into some machine and then live forever in that way, because the machine is not infused with the soul, and the soul is the interface of the spirit into the physical. So I really don't know that the singularity event is going to happen the way that science, when they're just looking at it from a technological perspective alone, I don't think that's really a possibility. I'm not a materialist. I really believe that consciousness and the spirit, the essence of who we truly are, is primary, and that the physical experience is a method of experiencing this physical density. It's an experience. It's a temporary thing, and that we have many other experiences beyond this life. So I think it's really important that we also recognize the human potential, that we don't necessarily, if we want to become superhuman, we don't necessarily need to develop just machine bodies and then transport our consciousness into it. We have that potential within us. Like we are already these amazing beings with huge potential inside of us. I mean, our DNA, our brain capacity, we're barely tapping even fractions of how much potential we could be awakening within us. And that we have the possibility of awakening it endogenously within our own body, within our own being. But in order to do that, we have to awaken our consciousness. We have to become more self-aware. We have to realize that, okay, there are things that I can do. There are methods that I can use that have been developed and passed down through ancient mystery school traditions that do help us to awaken to more of that potential and to those innate gifts that are within us. And we are meant to awaken to the divine human or the superhuman or the human that is godlike, beyond just using it in a technological kind of state. It is a very advanced spiritual state, and it has been shown. I mean, there are people who have accomplished such transformations and transmutations in the ancient world, and some even in modern day world in like Tibet and stuff. So we need to remember the power is within us again, rather than the power is all outside of us. But yes, I do feel that when we can awaken to that, to our greater divinity and to our greater innate potential, and that we can awaken the collective consciousness, and the collective can make a big shift of awakening as a whole, that not just individually, but as a good chunk of the collective makes an awakening shift, then we can start creating a more harmonious way of life on Earth. And that would include how we use and work with machines and artificial intelligence and so forth. And we could use those tools and technologies towards great good. But just like today, a tool is a tool, and it's in the hands of the beholder how it gets used. A hammer can be used to build a building and create a house, or it can be used to knock down walls, or to even do damage to things or to people. And so it's really about who's wielding that tool. And so technology is going to keep moving forward, and those are tools. But we humans are the ones who are wielding those tools, and we are the ones who need to shift our consciousness in order to wield them in a more enlightened way, or with greater wisdom. We need the wisdom to be guiding the use of our knowledge and our power, and the various tools that we are developing.
Absolutely. And well, even I understand you don't like to get into conspiratorial stuff, and I'm going to try not to, but I want to get into tying something that's very pertinent today with like the heart and what we have to do to use our hearts to reach alchemy. And it's been said that the best way to keep society forever in perpetual slavery is loan them money that doesn't exist and charge them interest on it. And when you learn that the heart chakra of the earth is the economy, and you realize the fractional reserve banking makes debt and inflation unavoidable, you realize our financial system is a heart attack waiting to happen, because it's the interest, stupid. You can't pay off the debt in a Ponzi scheme where there's usury. But as everybody's saying, well, not everybody, but some are asserting that this COVID-19 is a cover-up to get us back to the gold standard, and even better, this would be this ultimate stepping stone to what people like Tolek, the Andromeda Council contactee, have said is, contacts told him, is a 10 to 15 year period where humanity transitions out of using no money. Notice how that 10 to 15 year period could be around when, if you maybe extend it a little bit, like 2036, 2037, we're talking the asteroid Apophis hitting the Earth if it goes in the wrong keyhole. And also like 2037, that's when Brad Johnson, who channels Adronis, he says Spirit is telling him we're going to have a consciousness shift, and there's a pyramid code that he has to back that up. He says it's not just the ET content keys, there's a pyramid code thing backing this up, and he did give his source in a couple talks to say 2037 will be there'll be another like 3 days of darkness that'll make this upcoming 3 days of darkness look like a walk in the park. So we hate to put dates on things. People have had egg in their face when they do that, but my point is we got to get rid of the financial system, because that's a perpetual slave on the heart and like everything. And well, how do you any advice, like how to deal with money? Everybody wants to be done with money and join the civilizations out there. We're the only civilization that does use money. Alex Collier has been saying that for years, so it's time for us to join the club. So I've babbled long enough. What do you have to say about this?
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, so without a doubt, our current financial situation, or way that our global economies are working, are based on our belief in them, and it does have to transform. What it transforms into, whether it's gold standard or real tangible value or something else, I don't know. But what I would say regarding it right now is what I've personally learned, let me just talk from personal experience here, because I don't know a lot of the different things you were talking about. But from personal experience, when it comes to money, is that, okay, so money is energy. Money is, like in our US system, it's based on the belief and the sweat, blood, and tears that we put into earning it. And it's our faith in that system, right? So it really is just a form of value that measures a certain amount of energy that we put into something. So money is about your value. And when, whatever, it doesn't even matter really if it's today's current money system or if it's some, gold standard system or some other barter and trade system, whatever your form of exchange is, it's about your value. And what you need to look at when it comes to how you relate to this system of exchange is what you put value in. And when you want to be in the flow of that, flow of energy, let's just call it that, whether it's money or some other form, that flow of energy, we need to not be blocking the flow. And the ways that we can block the flow is based on our attachments, which relate to greed, whether it's greed for money or it's greed for things, or it's, even lack mentality is greed based because it's fear that there's not enough. So when we're, blocking the flow because of that greed or that sense of lack, often that comes down to a reflection of our inner mindset of what do I value? Do I feel like I have enough inside of me? Do I feel abundant, or do I feel like lacking inside of me? Do I feel like something's missing? And, do I value myself, right? Do I believe in myself? So, the outer forms and our relationship with them is just a reflection of what's going on inside of us. So, I learned this personally, that I used to block that flow of abundance in my life because I didn't have enough belief in myself or my worthiness. And as I worked on healing that, and as I came to shift this core belief around myself and how much I valued and whether I felt worthy and all of that, as I healed that within, I then started to change my dynamic and my relationship with forms of exchange. And so that is a really important piece, is our own worthiness and our own belief and mindset of who we are and where we place value. And that's a really important piece. And then the other important piece is something we call balance of energy exchange in the universe. There's a law of physics that says energy is neither created nor destroyed, it is only transformed, and that energy must be conserved. So there's sort of this physical and spiritual law of what we call equal energy exchange. And that, if I'm going to really be empowered by receiving something, then I need to give some equal energy exchange back. Whether that's monetary or that's some other, trade of service for service or whatever, it's like there has to be this honoring of equal energy exchange so that there is a continuous flow. And that when we give in that energy exchange, we have to give from a place of love, not from a place of fear or duty or, well, I feel like, this wasn't equal, or, there has to be like, yeah, I got so much value and I'm so happy to give in exchange for what I received. And we give with love, we give with appreciation, we give with gratitude. And when you can get into that shift where you're honoring that equal energy exchange in order to feel more empowered by it, and you're giving from a place of love and gratitude, and when you feel worthy to receive, and you have that belief in yourself, and having a value in yourself, then you're going to be tapping into a flow of abundance, and you're going to be more able to receive the flow when it comes. But then the other key piece about keeping in the flow is not blocking it, meaning not hoarding it. So we're not just receiving, we're also flowing it to others. We're giving and we're keeping it flowing and circulating, and we're investing or spending our money or whatever form of energy exchange is with those that we really believe in. I go and I shop at the stores that I really want to support because I like what they provide to me. I'm not going to just go with a cheap mindset. For example, I go and in Los Angeles here, we have a organic, high-level organic grocery store. Everything's organic. It's probably more expensive than Whole Foods probably, but I'm thrilled to shop there because it's high quality and it's independently owned, and it's small business, local, that I want to support, and I always feel really good about what I get from there. So I'm more than happy to spend that twice as much money than if I were going to Safeway or something like that. So I think it's really important, your mindset, and whether even if our financial system changes, which I think for us to create a more sustainable and harmonious world, it needs to change because it's really failing. And just like Buckminster Fuller said, if you want to, change the system, you can't change it from within. You have to make a new system that makes the old system obsolete. So I feel like that's going to be happening quite a bit over the coming years. Is that we need to really innovate and create new systems that are more harmonious and sustainable and balanced and everything for for the good of all, rather than just for the good of the few. And this is, but we as a collective, if we have an imbalance in our current systems, financial systems, that again is a reflection of issues within our own belief systems. So if there's poverty somewhere in the world, or if there's injustices or imbalances somewhere in the world, it's because inside as a collective, as a large collective consciousness, we feel a sense of lack. We feel not good enough. We feel unworthy. We feel unbalanced. And so it's being reflected in how we're creating our society outside. So in alchemy, we would call that an example of the principle of correspondence, that it's as above, so below, as below, so above, as the inner, so the outer, as the outer, so the inner. So the outer world is just a reflection of what's going on within us. And we have the power within us to change how it manifests in the outer world. But in order to change how it's manifesting in the outer world, we have to change how it is within us, within our soul, within our deep psyche, within our collective consciousness. And that work starts with each individual. That power is inside of us. It's not outside of us. But until humans make that shift, we're not gonna be able to, make any new system that we might put in place. If we haven't made that shift within our collective consciousness, then that new system is just going to fall into corruption again at some point. So we really need to make a core fundamental shift within us, within our spirit, within our psyche, within the human collective consciousness.
Absolutely. And since we're on the subject of money, I just wanted to point out, I was buying some gold off moneymetalsexchange.com, and I've never seen so many out of stock notices on all the gold, silver, and copper as there are now. So people, it may not be a bad idea to get some gold and silver, but I just want to point out something. I used to make a joke back in the day on my radio show about, like, if you know when the currency reset's going to happen, you should take out as many loans as you can and max out all your credit cards and get as much gold and silver as you can. And when the currency reset happens, you'll keep all your gold and silver, and all that debt will be erased in the push of a button when we go to the new system. Don't do that. I've come to the realization that would not work out, because when you build all that credit card debt, buying all that gold and silver, it's a bad karma statement on your report card. And I know that because when my family recently in a trust with some farm in the New England area with some cousins, like They gave me a $16,000 check in the trust. I instantly used it to pay off all my credit card debts. Right after I pressed the pay button, I got the worst headache ever. A bunch of synchronicities that happened told me karma to the head. This is family karma resolving, and you resolved all your karma with those credit card debts. Yeah, so you're not gonna be able to. It may seem like a good idea, but the karma will come back to bite you with all that money that doesn't exist that you cheated to use buy gold and silver. Don't do that, folks. Only buy as much as you can reasonably afford. So, moving on to something else worth discussing. Um, interesting. I hate it when I seem to make myself the spotlight and the limelight on my show, but I think maybe I should tell a little story regarding here, because since you're all into alchemy and all, and timelines and how we can change the timelines to pursue alchemy and all, maybe a little story like what I'm about to tell you can help make sense of how the universe works. Now, it is brought to my attention by Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis that on an alternate timeline, I played for the Philadelphia Phillies Major League Baseball team when I wasn't cut from the baseball team in 10th grade by my discriminatory coach, who thought I was going to be a distraction because the rest of the players like to joke around with me, and well, that's where the real reason I got cut. But anyhow, long story, I would have joined the Phillies if I did that, because I had made baseball like my life's passion when I was a kid. I wanted to play in the majors. It would have made perfect sense that it went to that level, but the timelines didn't work out that way. And but it turns out that Pete Incaviglia, the greatest slugger in history of college baseball, I remember having obsessions about him, like in the year 2000, like, why am I thinking about this guy all the time? And eventually I had the chance to get my picture with him in Florida when he was playing for an independent team, and my family drove to the place where his team was having spring training, and got the picture with him. And Lee Tinsley, a former player for the Philadelphia Phillies in 1996, as was Pete Incaviglia, hit a foul ball at a Phillies game that came in my direction, and after a few bounces, it landed in my seat, and some fans grabbed the ball, and the old man next to me grabbed it, and he felt bad for me that I wasn't able to get the ball after all so many people fought over it, so he gave me the ball. Well, according to Akashic Records Raider Andrew Bartzis, that was the universe's way of telling you, wink, wink, Lee Tinsley has a very important role in an alternate timeline. It turns out that Peter Caviglia and Lee Tinsley, according to Andrew Bartzis, in the alternate timeline where I was a member of the Philadelphia Phillies, they are coaches on that team. Now, I have no reason to believe Andrew Bartzis is making this up, and because if the Akashic Records say it, he's going to say it, so it must be true if the Akashic Records say it. And if that's the case, how can a story like this make sense of how timelines may interact when they don't necessarily play out to say, wink, wink, the universe is watching you and you making an art out of it?
Okay.
Gotcha.
Well,
Laugh. I'm glad I did
that. Yeah. I just because somebody's reading Akashic Records doesn't mean that that's actually what the Akashic Records say. It really depends on your reader, I suppose.
Andrew Bartzis is about the best you can get.
Okay.
Galactic is
Well, I do believe that we are multidimensional beings, and we have many parallel universes and parallel timelines, or possible realities happening, and it's all happening at once in some, higher dimensional field that can see them all. And and this is also something that I talk about in my mystery teaching series throughout several episodes. I talk about our multidimensional being and what that looks like, and different archetypal lives happening in parallel. And yeah, we could have all been pro athletes in another parallel life. And it is possible for us to, as we start to connect to our higher self, for example, we could have dreams even of those those other lives, or we can have potential, little encounters or little synchronicities that try to wake us up and remind us of our multidimensional being, that we're more than just this one personality in this one life and one timeline. And it's a very linear way of thinking. It's a very one-dimensional way of thinking that this is all I am. No, we are multidimensional. Have many more capacities within our spirit from a higher perspective. and it's playing out in multiple ways. So we, and another way you can think of this physical experience as a hologram, and our life is, our true self, our true life is somewhere out beyond the hologram, watching all of this play out in many different possibilities. And our part of our goal is to get back to that realization of who we are and where we are, and to not be so caught up once again in the minutia of one timeline or one experience of personality-based living, and to rise above that and to really awaken. But that's not to say that this life isn't important. I mean, what we do here and now is important, and it's all part of a learning experience. And for the greater learning of our spirit, we have multiple learning experiences that we are having different lessons through, different archetypal experiences through. And so, but in the end, we are that greater spirit. We're not just this personality in this one particular timeline of life.
Well, I'm glad you gave your best alchemical response to this, and well, where to go with this? Okay, sun gazing. Now, this is a very controversial subject in the world of spirituality and alchemy and whatnot, and alchemy turning things into gold. And it said that George Cavazos told me that gold, for all intents and purposes, is the physical representation of the spiritual essence of the sun, and that's monatomic gold, strictly speaking, if you want to get into that. But sun gazing is an art that some people have different ways of going about it, and this is an area that's very controversial regarding to the extent to which one can manifest their infinite consciousness potential to maximize sun gazing, or like not make it all the whole thing and still get something out of it, regarding opening your eyes and closing your eyes. They say that open eye sun gazing is okay during the first 45 minutes to an hour of sunrise and 45 minutes to an hour of sunset. When the UV index is 0, that's when you can look at the sun with open eyes. Any time else, you're supposed to do it with eyes closed. But there are some that assert that if you have enough state of mind and control of your consciousness, you could look at the sun with open eyes at solar noon on the summer solstice if you wanted to, and not harm yourself. And this really goes to my heart, because my mother is an ophthalmologist and I wanted to be a sun gazer. I knew I was going to hear it from her when I decided to be a sun gazer, and my God, I did. And I'm not going to get into the whole story too much, a lot of things there, but it was an experience to remember. And I couldn't help but wonder, if eyes do become damaged because someone's sun gazing, is it necessarily because the sun is causing damage, or because so many people have been led to believe that looking at the sun is harmful, when in reality the sun is really electromagnetic and not nuclear fusion, and our bodies are electromagnetic. We should be able to get the energy without it causing any damage to our body, but apparently our bodies aren't able to handle all that energy at this point, so damage is caused. But is that damage really caused by the sun, or is it caused by the collective consciousness placebo effect of people like my mother, who worry about damage happening to like their son's eyes or something? And just like the kid the mother who gives her kids the flu every winter because she fears her kids are going to give the flu, and law of attraction causes the flu, so too does, well, my mother maybe damaged my eyes by worrying about them all the time. Or was it the sun? Okay, a lot of questions here. I hope maybe you can make sense of this. Any comments?
Okay, well, so let's just talk physics. So the rays coming from the sun, even if you're thinking that it's just electromagnetic and not plasmic, I'm not sure I agree with that, but there are many different frequency levels of energy coming from the sun. And when those frequencies hit the physical body, they will potentially cause damage, depending on what level of frequency you're talking about, right? Just like you get a sunburn. Not because you believe you're going to get a sunburn or because a collective consciousness believes you're going to get a sunburn. It's because you've overexposed yourself to the sun without sunblock on, for too long of a period of time. It's the same thing with your eyes. There's your physical body has physical limitations. And so when you have an overexposure to those frequencies that maybe are not visible to you, then they can do damage. Like if a UV light comes in, or an X-ray level comes in, or gamma ray level comes in, it's going to ionize things. Atoms within your body get ionized, and so they can be damaging to the system. And yes, with sun gazing, when the sun is at the horizon, it's those frequencies coming in have to travel through more of our atmosphere, and that slows their frequency down, which is why at sunrise and sunset you see all the colors, reds and oranges and so forth, versus just bright yellow. So when their frequencies have been slowed down, then we can absorb them, we can observe them and take them in directly with our eyes and not get damaged by it. But when it's up in the higher up, and it's not having to go through so much of our atmosphere, and it's more direct, that yellow light and the UV light and so forth, it can be more damaging because the frequencies haven't been slowed down to a level that the body can handle it. So I would never encourage anybody to try sun gazing at noonday. If you want to do sun gazing, then do it at sunrise and sunset, and do small doses at a time to begin with, and then gradually work your way up to longer periods of time. But just start with 5 minutes. And it's also not just about the act of sun gazing. It's about your breath. It's about your consciousness. It's about meditation. You have to do the practice, not just keep it in this physical. When we think that it's mind over matter, that becomes a form of arrogance, spiritual arrogance, to think that, well, I'm just going to, believe that I am invincible and therefore this isn't going to affect me. And yet you're ignoring the laws of physics. You're ignoring the laws of nature and the laws of the universe and the laws of spirit. And that's just human arrogance is what causes us to do that. And there is going to be karma and repercussions for that. The one thing about this physical life experience is there is this thing called cause and effect here. And you will take certain actions and you will reap the results of that. You will have this direct feedback of the effect of those actions. And then you got to take responsibility for it. So you can't blame it on the collective consciousness for a certain belief system, because it was your choice and your action and your own belief system that put you in that position. I feel that when we're really becoming more awakened and more enlightened, we're going to be learning how to be in alignment with the laws of nature and the universe, not trying to supersede them. Humans are already trying to supersede nature, and that's why we see the conditions we see on this earth, where we have so much pollution, and we're not taking responsibility for it, and so it continues to be a problem. And that's based on human arrogance. So I have time for one more question.
Well, okay. It's not going to be a question. I was actually going to give you the chance to make the ultimate sales pitch out of your work, if you want to, the things that you offer,
sales
the things
pitch.
that you do. So now's your chance to make the ultimate sales pitch, and you're not doing it for the money, you're doing it for the love. So,
well, I'm not much of a salesperson, but if people want to,
I don't mean it that way. Pitch man is the other way. Billy Mays, the ultimate pitch man, who, God bless his soul, he said, "Don't dare call me a salesman. I only pitch things because I know that they're going to help people, and you know that your work is going to help people." So that's the way to look at it.
Well, that's what I'm here for, is to help people. So, if any of the stuff that I've said here resonates for people, they're welcome to check out my website at theresabullard.com. There's they can subscribe for my newsletter. I do video blogs and articles and, just announcements about events or offerings that are happening. I have some online courses. I do in-person training. Mostly the in-person training, though, at this time is not happening until further notice because of the COVID-19 situation and, not being able to do social gatherings and all of that. So, for now, I would just encourage people to go and check out my website and sign up for the newsletter if they want to be kept informed. And if they want an online course, there is one called the Quantum Transformation Formula, which is really about how do we get more masterful at the process of accomplishing our goals and creating from a quantum conscious state, or from more of a quantum mindset. So it gets into a lot of, what are those quantum principles? We also talk a bit about alchemy and how that applies to the creative formula. And it's a method that I've used quite a bit to make a lot of things happen in my life. So I share that in the Quantum Transformation Formula. And then I would also encourage people to check out the Mystery Teachings series. I know that you only watch it on YouTube, but honestly, whoever's posting those on YouTube is violating copyright. So I would encourage people, the subscription to Gaia really isn't that much. It's like buying a subscription to Netflix or something like that, but it's really good. I think there's a lot of really good content on Gaia. Beyond just my own series, there's some great experts there for people to learn from. And yeah, I would encourage supporting them because they're putting a lot of effort into helping bring this education to people.
Let me stop you for just a moment here before we bid you good day. You said it's violating copyright, but these things that are appearing that have been on Gaia, that are like on the Zohar, Stargate, Ancient Discoveries, and Broadcast TV YouTube channels, the only reason I think they're coming on is because Gaia TV's decided, okay, we've made enough money off this, let's make it out free for everybody. Is that a problem? Or is that not supposed to be the case?
I don't think that's the case. I don't know for sure. I'd have to ask them. But from what I can tell, people are screen recording. They're watching their Gaia channel, and then they're screen recording it and then reposting it on YouTube. I have no idea who they are. I don't really know if they have an agreement with Gaia. But my understanding is that, for the most part, Gaia is hoping people will subscribe. And I support that because, like I said, I think they're doing a good job creating really good content for people. And I'd rather support someone who's trying to create, spiritually aware shifts in consciousness versus let's just numb out with, sheer entertainment value that doesn't actually add value into people's personal development. So anyways, and if people are interested in knowing more about some of the mystery school work, they can go to modernmysteryschool.com and find different practitioners and so forth in their area. It is something that is done in person only, really, for the most part, so they'd have to find somebody local to them. But there are lists of practitioners all over the world where people can connect with mystery school healers and teachers and guides to get started on that path of progression through empowerments of activation and initiation and so forth.